Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. Former President Donald Trump is indicted in connection with his attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Coming up, we'll have details and hear from Special Counsel Jack Smith. White House says military operational readiness was the sole reason President Joe Biden decided to keep U.S. Space Command headquarters in Colorado instead of moving it to Alabama, as former President Donald Trump decided to do, and that politics played no role. We'll talk about it with a CQ Roll Call national security reporter Mark Satter. Vice President Kamala Harris in Florida rejecting Governor Ron DeSantis' invitation for her to meet with him to discuss Florida's new African American history education standards, which she has criticized for including that slaves receive some benefits from the opportunities to learn certain skills and trades. And U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield talks about the U.S. is assuming the Security Council presidency for August and the focus on Russia's war in Ukraine and food insecurity. From NBC News, a sealed indictment has been handed down against former President Donald Trump in the grand jury investigation of his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. The former president has been charged by the Department of Justice with 4 counts: a conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to obstruct the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election; a conspiracy to impede the January 6th congressional proceeding at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified; a conspiracy against the right to vote and to have that vote counted; and obstruction of an attempt to obstruct and impede the certification of the electoral vote. That reporting from NBC News. Special Counsel Jack Smith made a statement at the Justice Department.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots, and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
Why didn't you charge any of the other co-conspirators, Mr. Smith?
Are you worried this gets back to the election?
Are you planning to bring any other charges against more individuals?
Special Counsel Jack Smith at the Justice Department. Former President Trump's campaign putting out a statement It reads, "This is nothing more than the latest corrupt chapter in the continued pathetic attempt by the Biden crime family and their weaponized Department of Justice to interfere with the 2024 presidential election, in which President Trump is the undisputed frontrunner and leading by substantial margins. But why did they wait 2.5 years to bring these fake charges right in the middle of President Trump's winning campaign for 2024? Why was it announced the day after the big crooked Joe Biden scandal broke from the halls of Congress? The answer is election interference. The lawlessness of these persecutions of President Trump and his supporters is reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the former Soviet Union, and other authoritarian dictatorial regimes. President Trump has always followed the law and the Constitution with advice from many highly accomplished attorneys." Again, this is the statement from the Trump campaign. It goes on, "These un-American witch hunts will fail, and President Trump will be reelected to the White House so we can save our country from the abuse, incompetence, and corruption that is running through the veins of our country at levels never seen before. 3 years ago, we had strong borders, energy independence, no inflation, and a great economy. Today, we are a nation in decline. President Trump will not be deterred by disgraceful and unprecedented political targeting." The statement from the Donald Trump presidential campaign on the news today that a federal grand jury has handed up an indictment in the 2020 presidential election interference case, 4 counts against former President Donald Trump. Now to President Biden's decision to keep U.S. Space Command headquarters in Colorado instead of moving it to Alabama, as former President Trump had decided in 2021. Associated Press reports that President Biden's decision enraged Alabama lawmakers and is sure to fuel accusations that abortion politics played a role in the choice. The location debate has become entangled in the ongoing battle between Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville and the Defense Department over the move to provide travel for troops seeking reproductive health care. Senator Tuberville opposed the policy and is blocking hundreds of military promotions in protest. That from Associated Press. John Kirby is spokesperson for the White House National Security Council. He got a question from a reporter.
Does the White House have a response to Senator Tuberville accusing the Biden administration of scrapping plans to put the Space Command Center in Alabama out of punishment because Alabama is a red state? And did his move to hold off on military promotions influence that decision?
Let me put this as plainly as I can. The deciding factor for President Biden in deciding to keep Space Command in Colorado Springs was operational readiness, pure and simple. Had nothing to do with Senator Tuberville's holds, had nothing to do with partisan politics, had everything to do with making sure that Space Command could, in an undisrupted way, continue to operate at peak readiness levels in what is one of the most critical domains across the spectrum of military domains, and that's space. Pure and simple, operational readiness, nothing more. And then, I'm sorry, your second question, I wrote it down, but I can't read my own writing. What was it?
Did Senator Tuberville's move to hold off military promotions influence the decision?
No.
John Kirby is Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council in an audio-only news conference today. Senator Tuberville putting out a statement. As soon as Joe Biden took office, he paused movement on that decision and inserted politics into what had been a fair and objective competition, not because the facts had changed, but because the political party of the sitting president had changed. Some other reaction, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, Democrat from Alabama, said the choice to keep Space Command in Colorado bows to the whims of politics over merit. And on the other side, the bipartisan praise coming from the Colorado delegation. Senators Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, both Democrats, writing, after 2 investigations and rigorous review by the Department of Defense, the administration has made the decision that's in our country's best interest. Most importantly, this decision firmly rejects the idea that politics instead of national security should determine basing decisions central to our national security. And Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, writes, when Russia and China are developing lasers to destroy U.S. satellites, we should not be wasting time considering moving Space Command's headquarters for political reasons. Congressman Robert Aderholt, Republican from Alabama, was interviewed by CNN Monday night.
The last conversation that we had with the folks at the Pentagon and with General Dickinson was that there was no reason that it had to be in Colorado. So this came as a complete surprise to us today. We had no knowledge of it before this afternoon. We got word actually from a reporter. So no, we were completely shocked because, of course, obviously we knew that Colorado was wanting to get Space Command, but they ranked number 5, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. And Huntsville, North Alabama was number 1. And so therefore, it only made sense that if you're not using politics to make the decision, then it would come to Alabama.
And do you believe this is a political decision that is being made by the administration?
Well, I'm concerned that it is because you mentioned about the Inspector General. The Biden had his Inspector General also come in and take another assessment, and still Huntsville came out on top, heads and shoulders above all the rest. So it has been vetted many times. This decision was made quite some time ago. It happened to be President Trump was the president, but it was based on the decision that Huntsville and North Alabama was the best place. No political decision or political influence was put into that, to my knowledge, and it was solely based on what the dynamics of the situation was.
Congressman Robert Adderholt, Republican from Alabama, on CNN Monday night. With more on the Biden administration's decision to keep the U.S. Space Command headquarters in Colorado, joining us on the phone is Mark Satter, national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. Thanks for being with us. You report that this ends a 2.5-year battle. What's the history of it?
Sure. So in the waning days of the Trump administration in January 2021, former President Donald Trump decided to relocate Space Command to Alabama. Shortly after that, he said he made the decision alone to do so. And then, of course, President Joe Biden took office and his administration put that on ice. So for the past 2.5 years, that decision has been under review. What that means is the Pentagon Inspector General, and the Biden administration itself have been reviewing this decision and kind of going through it. There hasn't been a lot of insight into the Biden administration's thinking during this process, but the political fight has kind of played out on Capitol Hill. And of course, as we saw, it has culminated in this decision to keep U.S. Space Command in Colorado Springs.
And the issue has created some interesting cross-party allies within the state of Colorado and the state of Alabama, reinforcing that this is an economic issue in addition to being a national security issue. How much money, how many jobs are at stake?
A fair few. It's, standing up the entire United States Space Command is a massive undertaking. And, part of the reason that the Biden administration is using to justify keeping it in Colorado is to say that it would be a massive logistical task to move the command all the way to Alabama and delay what's called full operational capability, just, meaning the facility is up and running, by a number of years. The Biden administration said yesterday that if they were to move this to Alabama, it wouldn't be until the 2030s that it was fully up and running there. Whereas in Colorado, it's slated to reach full operational capability this month.
Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee, said in a statement, "This fight is far from over." What could we expect next?
Congressman Rogers has said that he is going to investigate this and see if the Biden administration, quote, intentionally misled his committee on its, quote, manipulation of the selection process. There may be hearings on the matter. We may see more letters and inquiries sent from Mike Rogers and from his colleague in the Senate, Tommy Tuberville. But it's unclear how much power they have to actually affect the decision. It seems that it's been made at this point.
We're talking with Mark Satter, national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. What does Space Command do?
Space Command oversees the Space Force, which is the newest branch of the military. So they are responsible for the U.S. military's operations in space.
The White House says that Senator Tuberville's hold on military nominations had nothing to do with this decision. Has anybody, including Senator Tuberville, disputed that directly?
Not directly, but it is difficult to talk about one without the other. Of course, Senator Tuberville's holds are based on the Pentagon's abortion policies, which allow for time off and travel expenses paid for service members who are forced to travel for abortions. Senator Tuberville is staunchly opposed to that and has held up hundreds of nominations on the Senate floor in protest. There has been no official word from the Biden administration that this is a response to that, but Tuberville and others have alleged that this is a retaliatory move and that, of course, abortion politics are playing a role in the entire situation.
Mark Satter, national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. Find his stories at rollcall.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
From USA Today, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis challenged Vice President Kamala Harris to come to Florida and have a discussion with him about the state's new African American history curriculum, which she has derided as propaganda and lies over an assertion that slaves benefit from skills they developed in captivity. Governor DeSantis invited Vice President Harris to meet with him in Tallahassee, the state's capital, as early as Wednesday of this week in a letter that blasted the Biden administration and accused the vice president of attempting to score cheap political points. The Florida governor, who is also seeking the GOP nomination for the presidency, said in the Monday letter that his office posted on social media that Biden officials had repeatedly disparaged our state and misinformed Americans about the state's Black history standards. That reporting from USA Today. Vice President Kamala Harris replied when she was in Florida today, in Orlando, at the 20th Women's Missionary Society of the African Methodist Episcopal Church Quadrennial Convention.
We even see extremists ban books and attempt to erase and even rewrite the ugly parts of our history. Right here in Florida, they plan to teach students that enslaved people benefited from slavery. They insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, in an attempt to divide and distract our nation with unnecessary debates. And now they attempt to legitimize these unnecessary debates with a proposal that most recently came in of a politically motivated roundtable. Well, I'm here in Florida, and I will tell you there is no roundtable, no lecture, no invitation we will accept to debate an undeniable fact. There were no redeeming qualities of slavery. And as I said last week when I was again here in Florida, we will not stop calling out and fighting back against extremist so-called leaders who try to prevent our children from learning our true and full history.
Vice President Kamala Harris today in Orlando, Florida at the Women's Missionary Society of the AME Church Quadrennial Convention During her speech, she also talked about voting rights, reproductive rights, and countering gun violence. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican presidential candidate, was interviewed on Fox News Monday night, talking about the vice president and African-American history curriculum in his state.
Kamala Harris got on a jet at taxpayer expense and flew to Florida to lie about the African-American history standards that were developed.
Understood.
And why is this important, though?
One, you're asked about it a lot,
but
so
you
that's
can't,
what you're saying.
No, I'm saying it is important. Why? You can't bend the knee to the left's lies. When the left lies and creates these phony narratives, you've got to push back. They've been doing this to Republicans for years and years. Republicans bend the knee, and it's just one thing after another. Second, this goes into the whole fight on indoctrination in schools. We eliminated critical race theory a couple years ago. When we did that, the media lied and the left lied, saying, you don't want to teach about African-American history, equating political activism in CRT with black history. He said, no, not only in the bill it says you've got to do all these things, teach about injustice, teach about discrimination. So these standards were born out of the fight against CRT, because this is true history. So to take something and demagogue it like that, that's bad faith. And here's the thing. This was a public process. These guys were going through it. People could have raised objections. No one said anything about this. They were being lauded for the job that they did by people across the political spectrum. Now Harris comes in and parachutes. What Republicans should have done is push back against her, say, you are operating in bad faith. These guys down in Florida, they didn't have an agenda. They were just trying to shoot straight. We know what the left does. Republicans, you cannot take that bait. You've got to fight back against these people.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican presidential candidate, on Fox News Monday night. An AP story reads, more than 70 years after doctors at Johns Hopkins Hospital took Henrietta Lack's cervical cells without her knowledge, a lawyer for her descendants said they have reached a settlement with a biotechnology company that they accused of reaping billions of dollars from a racist medical system. Article continues, tissues taken from the black woman's tumor before she died of cervical cancer became the first human cells to be successfully cloned, reproduced infinitely ever since. The cells have become a cornerstone of modern medicine, enabling countless scientific and medical innovations, including the development of the polio vaccine, genetic mapping, and even the COVID-19 vaccines. That from AP. Wall Street today, the Dow up 71, NASDAQ down 62, S&P down 12. Labor Department says the job openings in June are down a bit from May, 9.58 million versus 9.62 million. And layoffs also down, 1.53 million from 1.55. CNBC writes that economists were watching the two data points closely for clues about the direction of a labor market that has proven surprisingly resilient despite a series of Federal Reserve interest rates hikes aimed at slowing the economy and inflation. Declines in both job openings and layoffs indicate that demand for labor is slowing, as the Fed hopes, while companies are still retaining workers, indicating that the unemployment rate is unlikely to spike anytime soon. Reporting from CNBC. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, brings you a recap of the day's most important events. Find out what happened on Capitol Hill, the White House, and with policymakers, all delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at cspan.org/connect.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. On the situation in Niger, this from the New York Times, hundreds of Europeans gathered in an airport in Niamey, the capital of the West African nation of Niger, for evacuation flights set up by France on Tuesday, nearly a week after a coup threatened to set off a regional conflict. The evacuation plans emerged just hours after two Western African states, Burkina Faso and Mali, said they would join forces to defend Niger if a bloc of other countries in the region carried out a threat to intervene militarily, unless the ousted president was returned to office. Some questions about all this to the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference.
If we could start with Niger, if you could give us an update on what you're seeing on the ground, and specifically France and some other European countries have started evacuating their people. Is the U.S. seeing anything that would cause you to start that process?
A few things. Number one, our embassy is open today, operating on a normal schedule. We're monitoring the efforts by France and other Europeans to evacuate their citizens. We urge Nigerian authorities to facilitate an orderly, safe evacuation. At this time, we do not have indications of threats to U.S. citizens or facilities, but we are continually reevaluating our posture to ensure the safety of our citizens.
And I wonder if you would have any comment on these statements by Mali and Burkina Faso rejecting the ECOWAS intervention on Niger, and that basically there's concern that this is going to spill over into a regional conflict. So, where does the U.S. stand on those countries, seeming to support the coup makers in Niger?
We support the efforts of ECOWAS and leaders in the region to resolve this situation, to restore the democratic president, the elected president of Niger. We obviously saw the comments by other countries. I think it's inappropriate to make those statements at this point. We're not going to engage in hypotheticals. We don't believe there's any reason to ever get to that ultimate conclusion. We believe that the democratically elected president of Niger ought to be restored to full authority immediately.
Do you see any prospect for that? Is there any progress on reversing the coup?
We continue to work it. The secretary, as I said yesterday, has talked to a number of leaders in the region, has spoke to President Bazoum on a number of occasions. ECOWAS is, of course, involved on the front lines and is continuing to work it diligently. I don't have any updates, but it continues to be our policy to push for his full restoration.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller taking reporters' questions. The United States has 2 military bases and about 1,000 troops in Niger assisting with counterterrorism efforts. The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder asked if any U.S. action is being taken.
We'll go to Lita Baldor, AP.
Thanks, Pat. On Niger, can you say whether or not there are any efforts right now for the U.S. to either evacuate its forces or to use the troops there to help in any way any of the ongoing evacuations by other nations, including France? And secondly, can you say whether or not U.S. forces are continuing to do counterterror missions, or has all of that been stopped?
Yep, thanks very much. So in terms of evacuation operations from Niger, I'm not aware at this time of any U.S. forces participating in that. Obviously, we're a planning organization. We're always going to plan for various contingencies, but we continue to keep a close eye on the situation there. All indications right now that there's no, imminent threat against any U.S. personnel or American citizens. But again, we continue to encourage American citizens who are in the country to stay in close contact with our embassy there. As far as security cooperation, those efforts right now are suspended in light of the situation, but certainly we maintain close contact with our Niger military counterparts in the country as the situation continues to unfold.
So at this point, none of the U.S. forces have been pulled out at all, right? They're all
Correct.
still there. They're all still there.
Correct.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, also an Air Force Brigadier General, at his news conference at the Pentagon. Some headlines from the war in Ukraine from CNN. Russia says Ukraine again attempted a drone strike in Moscow targeting the exact same building that was hit on Sunday. Ukrainian officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, have suggested that these attacks are meant to shatter any remaining sense of calm in the Russian capital. An advisor to President Zelensky said Moscow is rapidly getting used to a full-fledged war. And the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, denied Poland's claim that about 100 of the Wagner mercenaries who are in the country have moved closer to the Polish border, according to a statement published by his office. Russia's war in Ukraine will be a main topic this month as the U.S. takes over the revolving presidency of the United Nations Security Council. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, held a news conference today in New York City, talking about one of her focuses, on dealing with food insecurity made worse by Russia's invasion.
Our first priority, addressing famine and food insecurity, is deeply personal to me. I've seen firsthand what happens to people who have hunger thrust upon them. People who, but for the accident of time and place, are no different from any of us here today. Addressing famine and food insecurity has motivated my work throughout my career, and taking on this global crisis has been a top priority of the Biden administration from day one. We know food security is national security, and we know without a shadow of a doubt it is within our power to feed the world and end famine. But to do so, we must root out conflict-induced food insecurity. Around the world, hostilities breed hunger. Fighting breeds famine. And we see this in places like Yemen and Sudan and Syria and elsewhere. And of course, in Ukraine, where President Putin's forces have weaponized food. Russia has launched a full-scale assault on the world's breadbasket, and it is dead set on depriving the world of Ukraine's grains. That's why Moscow unilaterally withdrew from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and it's why it mercilessly attacked the Odessa region and other ports in Ukraine. Conflict-induced hunger is a pressing matter of international peace and security, and the Council must take action.
The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, at the UN in New York City as the U.S. assumes the presidency of the Security Council for August. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today launched a new Bureau of Global Health Security Diplomacy within the State Department. A Washington Examiner article explains the goal of the Bureau is to elevate the issue of global health in U.S. international policy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Secretary Blinken spoke at the State Department.
We all know from the COVID-19 pandemic what a profound threat a public health emergency poses to every aspect of our lives. It took the lives of millions of people, upended those of hundreds of millions more, devastated communities and economies around the world. Indeed, the last few years have made evident that a pandemic is not only a health crisis, it's a security crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a humanitarian crisis. We have an imperative to do everything that we can to prevent another pandemic. And when the next health threat emerges, and it's not a question of when, or it's not a question of if, excuse me, it's a question of when, we have to be ready. And the world at large has to be ready. That is a central mission of the new Bureau, to leverage the full power and purpose of American diplomacy to bring the world together, to prevent, and if that doesn't work, to prepare for and respond to the next health disaster. We're setting up a new Bureau to focus fully on the need to drive both internal and international coordination and accelerate the State Department's ongoing efforts to strengthen global health security so that the world can respond with immediacy and intention when the next health crisis emerges. And that's where diplomacy comes in.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department today. He also announced that the director of this new Bureau of Global Health Security Diplomacy will be the current U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator and Special Representative for Health Diplomacy, John Nkengasong. Story from UPI, an independent board advising the White House on intelligence matters, has urged the reauthorization of the controversial Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. In a report released Monday, members of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board and the Associated Intelligence Oversight Board warned in their report that a failure by Congress to reauthorize Section 702 amid debates over instances of its misuse would constitute a serious blow to the nation's security. Rather than let the law sunset on December 31st, they instead recommended changes be made to prevent incidents of noncompliance in which U.S. law enforcement agencies have used the extensive warrantless spying powers granted by the law on American citizens, rather than only on foreign nationals as required under its provisions. That reporting from United Press International. The spokesperson for the National Security Council, John Kirby, highlighted this report in his briefing with reporters.
Yesterday, the administration made public the President's Intelligence Advisory Board's review of the effectiveness of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. For those who aren't familiar with FISA Section 702, I suspect most of you are, but it's one of the nation's most critical intelligence tools that's used to protect our nation. Thanks to the intelligence obtained under this authority, the United States has been able to understand and respond to threats posed by the People's Republic of China, who are intent on causing harm to our interests and those of our allies and partners, to enable the disruption of fentanyl trafficking, and to help mitigate the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, and much, much more. The administration agreed with the unanimous conclusion reached by the group that failure to reauthorize Section 702 could be, quote, one of the worst intelligence failures of our time. We also agree with the board's recommendation that Section 702 should be reauthorized without new and operationally damaging restrictions on reviewing intelligence lawfully collected by the government, and with measures that build on proven reforms to enhance compliance and oversight, among other improvements. So we look forward to reviewing the board's full list of recommendations and taking them on board to see what we can do to better secure this critical national security authority, and to working with Congress to ensure its reauthorization.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council, in an audio-only virtual news conference today. More from the UPI article. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments, first passed 15 years ago in response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, permits the government to conduct targeted surveillance of emails, text messages, and other communications of foreign persons located outside the United States with the compelled assistance of internet service providers and phone companies. Since then, authorities claim the capabilities have been instrumental in preventing several potential high-impact events. Civil liberties groups and some U.S. lawmakers from both parties, however, have steadfastly opposed the law since its creation, claiming the FBI, National Security Agency, and other law enforcement bodies regularly use it as an illegal domestic surveillance tool. That from UPI. The Transportation Security Administration has been testing facial recognition software to verify travelers' identification at some airports in the United States, and the TSA says it's voluntary. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, says he has questions about whether that is true. He was interviewed today by Washington Post reporter Leanne Caldwell.
As more, record level travel for some Americans this summer, more and more airports are using this facial recognition mechanism through the TSA process. What are your concerns about it?
Well, I'm very concerned about a government creating a surveillance state where they track Americans everywhere you go. And what the TSA had in their 2018 plan was, hey, we want to experiment with this and have an opt-in option. An individual in line could choose, instead of having their face identified by the TSA agent, to have the camera identify them. But they have gone from opt-in to opt-out. And in fact, they really have opt-out. What they have done is the agent directs you in front of the camera, but they have no sign in the line as you approach saying, hey, you will have an option and you don't have to have the camera. They don't tell you, they don't have a sign at the kiosk. They don't have a sign under the camera. In the 4 last times I've gone through Reagan National, each time I've posted about it, and I've documented the lack of that signage. On my last trip, last Friday, they had no sign in the line, no sign at the kiosk, no sign on the camera. What they did have was a sign that had been turned sideways and squeezed in between 2 kiosks so that nobody could read it. And if you did read it, it wouldn't say facial recognition, and it wouldn't say you have a choice. Somewhere way down this fine print, there is an indication that you can opt out, you can volunteer to opt out, but of course no one's it's just the complete system is set up to force you. When I have said to an agent, this is not required and you're supposed to inform people that this is an option, they've said, no, we're not. And when I have said, well, I'm choosing not to be in front of the camera, and I hand them my driver's license, I've had an agent say to me, well, you're going to hold up yourself and the entire line, which was simply not true. It takes like 4 seconds for the agent to look at your face and look at your card. On the second to my last trip, the agent, seeing that I was taking pictures of what they were doing, which is totally legal by the way, and I wanted to protect myself, make sure I wasn't going to get arrested. The agent had me stand aside, and you can hear him on tape saying, "What are we going to do about him?" And I mean, they absolutely are at the front end of setting up a surveillance state. We should all be extremely worried about it. TSA is not honoring the opt-in strategy. They are not honoring what they have said is they're informing people to opt out. They clearly are on a path that we should all be concerned about.
What do they do with that information? Do you know?
So information initially is simply used for the computer to say, does the license, which is being scanned simultaneously by the agent, match the picture just taken? But then they have basically said they're holding that information, and they say temporarily to do a study. Well, what does temporarily mean? Where are they holding this? You know, they've been hacked before, and they've lost thousands and thousands of pictures. Maybe the term is hundreds of thousands. I don't have the number in front of me, but the situation of being tracked everywhere you go in America is just too tempting. I mean, they are going to connect this system up in time to a database of folks that they have an interest in. And that means it won't just be to connect your face to your driver's license. This is the first step. Then they connect it to the database. They say, well, now we can catch people wherever they go, people we're looking for. And it's tempting. It sounds like criminal justice will be enhanced. Maybe you'll catch somebody who has a warrant on them. Do we want a government with the huge powers to track us everywhere we go? What is the cost in privacy? What is the cost in freedom? We see around the world the advanced surveillance state like China is exercising with the Uyghurs. We do not want to live, I don't want to live, and I don't think Americans want to live in that freedom-constrained environment, so we have to stop it now.
Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, a virtual interview with Washington Post reporter Leanne Caldwell. Earlier this year, he joined other Democratic senators in introducing the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act, which, according to a press release, would prevent the government from using facial recognition and other biometric technologies which pose significant privacy and civil liberties issues and disproportionately harm marginalized communities. New Jersey's Democratic Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver has died suddenly, one day after being rushed to the hospital. She was 71 years old. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, also Democrat, said in a statement, "Tammy and I and our children are incredibly saddened to learn of the passing of our dear friend, colleague, and partner in government. When selecting her to be my running mate in 2017, Lieutenant Governor Oliver was already a trailblazer in every sense of the word. She had already made history as the first black woman to serve as Speaker of the General Assembly and just the second black woman in the nation's history to lead a House of a state legislature. I knew then that her decades of public service made her the ideal partner for me to lead the state of New Jersey. It was the best decision I ever made." That statement from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. From C-SPAN's video library, here is the Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver in November 2021, election night, as she and Governor Murphy were running for re-election, and the votes were still being counted.
We know what the people of New Jersey want. And the people of New Jersey don't want to go back to the era when for 8 years their issues were not addressed. The things that they wanted to put forward: investment in children, investment in higher education, investment in affordable housing, investment in innovative technology, and investment in our small, women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses in this state. And at the end of the day, we know with confidence that we have represented the interests of all New Jerseyans. Didn't matter if they were a D or an R. And for that, we Democrats will be rewarded by emerging in this campaign as the victors.
New Jersey's Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, election night 2021, on her way to re-election along with Governor Murphy. Sheila Oliver has died at the age of 71 from an undisclosed medical issue that led to her being hospitalized on Monday. At the time, she was acting governor as Governor Murphy was out of the country with his family on vacation. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. The stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.